Hi, I'm Berta Karapetyan from School Products Yarn Shop, New York, and founder of Karapetyan Yarns. Today I'm going to be doing the tutorial on the binding off or casting off. And I will show you my different types of casting off, the most common ones, and I will show my tricks for different type of binding off. And I'm using here Karabella Aurora Bulky, which is wonderfully bulky yarn with a very good stitch definition, as you can see here, and springy feel. All right, let's start with American or English way of bind off, the most common here in the United States, and the one that I usually start teaching people when they just start knitting. Okay, so the way we bind off is we go to the stitch and we knit the first stitch regularly, then we do the second stitch regularly, and then you insert your left needle into the first stitch and you pull it over the second. Make a stitch, pull a stitch, make a stitch, pull a stitch. Now, if you are a continental knitter, you do exactly the same thing. You make a stitch and you pull a stitch, make a stitch and pull a stitch, make a stitch and pull a stitch. This is the most common way of binding off. That produces, however, pretty tight and not very flexible end of knitting. And sometimes it's really too tight. Now, I am willing to show you the European bind off, which I particularly use. If I use my Eastern European knitting, then I'm usually using European bind off. What is the difference? I think it's much easier and you can definitely do it. The only difference is that we have to reposition our stitches. Here is how we do it. You have your stitches to bind off. You take the stitch and you put it back on the needle. Then the stitch that you have on your right hand, you put it there, and two you knit together. Now reposition the stitch, put the first one there and knit them together. So you're basically knitting all of them two together, reposition, two together, two together. And that's much more economical in movements, and we like it very much. It gives you a little bit more flexibility, and it's a little stretchier than the one I showed you before, when you knit a stitch and you pull it over, knit a stitch and pull it over. But as I said, you can do whatever is better and easier for you. So that is number one and number two. So we learned the European bind off and American bind off. At the end, you have this big stitch. You make it big. Then you take the yarn. I don't want to cut it. You take the yarn, you pull it through, you make a knot, and then you clip it. That's how you end your knitting, completely bound off. Sometimes you need extra stretchy bind off. That comes when you make socks, or you do hat from the top down, or on the neck of the sweater. So you really need to have the flexibility of the bind off. So when you need the flexibility of bind off, here is what you do. You make a stitch, Then the next stitch could be knitted. Then you put them back on the needle and you knit them together. You knit a stitch, then you put them back and you knit them together. Remember the last time when I was showing you European, you just repositioned it and you make it together, knit it together. But in this case, you knit the stitch first, then you put it back and knit them together. You knit a stitch, put both back on the needle and knit them together. And in that case, you produce a very, very flexible and stretchy bind off, which I use a lot for the garments that need this flexible edging. Look how flexible and stretchy is that in comparison to this one, which is not really stretchy, but this is extremely stretchy and wonderful. So that is how we do the stretchy bind off. Then I'm going to show you how to do the bind off if you do, let's say, ribbing, 2x2 rib. So in that case, we usually say bind off in pattern. And that means that if you see the knit stitch, you would do it in the knit stitch and pull it over. And then you see the purl stitch, and you will purl the stitch and then pull it over. Purl a stitch, pull it over. Then go and knit a stitch, pull it over, knit a stitch, pull it over, and just go like that. And purl a stitch and over. So either knit a stitch and pull over, or purl a stitch and pull over. So that bind off is quite flexible too, and it looks pretty good. So that's how we bind off in pattern. And then I will show you my own bind off when you create little braid, and I call it Berta's bind off. That is used when you want to create your own nice edging, not just the line of braids, but a little edging. And look how easy it is. We are on the purl side of our stockinette. All you have to do is to knit on the purl side. Just make 1 row knits, okay? Which of course you will see, and you know, that will appear as a purl on the right side. So we're knitting on the purl side, just 1 row, and then we turn around. We turn around, and you have this purl line, and now start binding off regular way. Knit a stitch, knit the second stitch, pull over, knit a stitch, pull over, or any way that you want to do that, European or American way of binding off. And that creates a very pretty edging, like a cord type of edging. So I need more yarn, so to show you more. Make a stitch, pull a stitch. So we keep going like this. Okay, so that I think is enough, and you can see how pretty that looks. That are the basic ways that I am using bind-offs in different situations for different things. That's basically what you need to know if you need to do the tight bind-off or flexible bind-off or bind-off in pattern, or if you want to add this beautiful braid. Okay, that's it for today.